Hello and welcome to another episode of Learning Leadership 321 with myself, Brian Webster. Now, it's been 3 months since the last webinar, so I really hope that the wait was worth it because today we're joined by the amazing Professor Brendan McCormack. Now, Brendan's currently the Dean of the School of Nursing at the University of Sydney, as well as the head of the Susan Walkell School of Nursing and Midwifery. He's an academic with over 600 publications and has many worldwide professorship titles and recognitions. So his full blog is on the website, of course, with his full bio. So please do check that out. And without further ado, let's jump right in. Thanks for joining. Hi, Brendan. So thanks very much for joining us today on Learning Leadership 321. It's great to have you. So I've already done
Pleasure.
your intro bio and things, so hopefully the listeners and the viewers will jump right in and get a good grasp of who you are and what you're up to at the minute, or the multiple things that you're up to. So
For sure.
to start the podcast, Brendan, we'll jump into a bit of an icebreaker. So, a bit of the theme of the whole movement that I'm trying to do has a bit of gratitude through it. So, gratitude's been shown that it could have great impacts on our mental health and then subsequently our physical health. So, what's made you smile today?
Mm, Great question. Firstly, great to see you again, Brian. And
Thank you.
this is a great thing you're doing. So always delighted to be part of it. Um, what made me smile? Lots of things made me smile. But the one I guess I would highlight would be one of my colleagues. She's leading a research project with young people and diabetes, and she's setting up a whole peer researcher process with 13 to 18-year-olds. And she's running a workshop with them today. And I had the pleasure of going and saying hello to them and talking to them about why they're engaged in this work. And they were all so excited about being here, being in the school, doing this work. And it was just joyful, really. So, yeah, that was a big smiley moment.
Well, that sounds really exciting. So, is this children that have possibly got diabetes then?
Yeah, so she's works in the field of nutrition, and is has got a new funded project to kind of look at kind of better management strategies, how to engage young people in better kind of health interventions to manage their diabetes and life with it. So it's a huge project she's engaged in, but great to see this kind of co-design work and with really enthusiastic 13 and up to 18-year-olds kind of really committed to trying to make a difference. So it's fantastic.
Oh wow, that sounds amazing. Cool. I'll really keep me up to date on that because that's quite interesting. I'm quite interested in
Yeah,
the whole lifestyle movement of medicine, but I don't like that title actually because I think it misses out the fact that
yeah,
it
for sure.
medicalizes it right away. But
Absolutely.
yeah, keep me up to date. And I suppose it's a good point
Yeah.
to say I've got a 6-year-old non-diabetic
Yeah.
jumping about in the background here. So if anybody sees that, write you and stop it, please. But
I'm sure people
okay,
appreciate it.
yeah, absolutely.
Keeps us all normal.
Definitely, yeah. And feel free to drink away and take notes. I will take notes and things as well. So the second bit of an icebreaker, Brendan, is a wee quote I read online, and I wondered what your initial sort of 10-second response and thoughts are. So here we go. It says, fear has no place in leadership or management. If anyone uses fear as a strategy to get people to work or to get things done, then that person has no place in leading and no place in managing. So what do you think of that?
I completely agree. Unfortunate, and I've spoken about that myself in my own work, which I'll probably come back to a bit. But so much of what organizations do is create cultures that create fear. So it creates fear among people that if they make a mistake, they're going to get punished in some way. If they do something wrong, they're going to get punished in some way, and it generates a lack of trust. And if you have fear, you don't get learning. You just get compliance, and if you get compliance, you don't get creativity and critical thinking. So I completely agree with the quote that fear is a very dangerous thing for managers to use as a way of trying to get the best out of people. I don't see how you get the best out of people by creating a culture of fear. So yeah, it's a good quote.
It certainly, yeah, it definitely made me think about drug errors in nursing. And
Yeah,
we've got this horrible
absolutely.
stigma where people don't own up to a drug error because of this fear
Yeah,
of sort of repercussion. Okay,
yeah.
perfect. So that was just a wee icebreaker there. So will we jump into your 3 points? So I've obviously give you a bit of time to think about 3 points on leadership. What are your three tips for our listeners, our watchers, our engagers? And
Yeah, it was a great thing to think about, and what would I really focus on? And it kind of made me think, but then actually, in a way, it was quite easy because I thought, oh, I know what I focus on, and they are the three things, and that's is what it has to be. So my first tip is leaders should always focus on how to get the best from the people that they lead. And what I mean from that is that they should always be focused on helping people to flourish first and foremost. And that if leaders focus on how do I help team members to flourish, then we focus on different things than what you've just been talking about in terms of fear. Because if you create a culture that's about just trying to manage people, then you put more and more kind of bureaucratic controlling systems in place and you reduce people's autonomy and sense of agency. But if you create a culture that's about helping people to flourish, then what we do is try and create learning conditions. We try and create safe spaces where people are able to take risks, but to do so in a really informed and open and honest way. We engage in deep listening and really connect with people. We hold back from making assumptions about people and what might be driving them, and we try and check that out through evidence, meaning conversations and engagement and just being with people. And ultimately, when we focus on flourishing, we give people the autonomy that they need to really flourish as human beings and to be constantly self-driven. So for me, creating the conditions for people to flourish is my number one leadership practice, and a focus that I think leaders should pay priority to, really.
well, that's really
Um,
good. Do you think we're lacking that in the field that we work in?
100% for sure. I think unfortunately many of our health systems are built around cultures of fear, and that's based on a management and control ethos rather than a flourishing and leadership ethos. It's based on putting more and more systems in place to prevent people from doing things wrong rather than creating conditions where people feel okay about making mistakes and know how to learn from them, and that the system enables them to learn. And when you get a focus on flourishing rather than compliance, then you create a culture of learning rather than a culture of fear. But unfortunately, most of our health systems are based on cultures of compliance, and then we wonder why people don't learn from their mistakes. And it's crazy. Um, so flourishing is the ultimate good that we should be, as leaders, we should be working towards and helping people to be in that space. Um, Alongside that, my second tip then is to be authentic. Um, Basically to be a real person. For me, that is so important. It kind of is about the values I hold and being explicit about the values I hold. So here we have worked hard at getting very explicit values in our school. I use them all the time in how I, connect with people, in how we in meetings and discussions in different forums to kind of constantly connect us with those values. If this screen behind me wasn't, you'll see them sitting behind my head on the board, but they're just always there because it's what keeps me real, and being authentic is about being real and not being something you're not. If you're being authentic, it's also, you don't have a problem showing vulnerability. I don't have a problem just being vulnerable in that place, be it emotionally vulnerable or psychologically vulnerable. If I think, God, I don't know what's going on here and I need help, then I know I can go to my colleagues and say that, and that's going to be okay. And they're not going to think, oh my God, he's a terrible leader. They're just going to go, yep, that's okay. We can work that out, and that is pretty normal around here. And lastly, I think if you're being authentic, then you work to try and understand people rather than trying to fix things. So um, again, being authentic means that you kind of put things in place because you know you're not going to be the font of all knowledge, and that it's about a sense of codependency. So if you have a leadership team, then you're all in this together, and it's not just about all hanging with you, and it can't be. But fundamentally, it's about being a real person who, doesn't try and position themselves as some kind of other that they're not, but just are real to people around them. And I think it creates a very different culture from a more hierarchical, controlling, not real, where you're trying to pretend to be something of an elevated status, which I cannot stand and have no time for at all. So yeah, so being authentic is really important. I could go down a rabbit hole with that one, but I won't. So
Definitely. No, and I liked what you said about compliance because I listened to a podcast the other day by the leadership chap Simon Sinek, who
yeah,
unfortunately doesn't do anything about healthcare. I really wish I could pluck him and
I
drop him into
know.
the NHS, but he talks about we've got compliance departments where it should be sort of ethics and values departments, not
Yeah,
compliance. Because again, going back to that medical model of lifestyle medicine, it right away it negatively connotates
yeah,
that department, So
yeah.
definitely, and I liked what you said
Isn't
about.
he?
Sorry,
Sorry.
no,
No,
no.
no, I said it's Simon Sinek, the one who wrote the book on bullshit management. Is that the one?
I think so. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was, and his biggest one is start with why and ask yourself why
Yes.
which is a really good one. But I liked what you said about being authentic. But interestingly, some of the critics of authentic leadership say that it can be a bit of a weakness if you show too much realness. What do you think about that?
I think there's a point to that. I mean, you can't. I mean, authenticity doesn't mean that you have to bare your soul and that you burden everybody else with everything else that's going on in your life, and that you can dump things on people because you're a bit fed up or down or whatever. That's not what authenticity means. I mean, I think authenticity is about being really grounded in your values and what it is that you're connected with, and not pretending. And for me, that is a fundamental, and I think you can't do that enough. I think not pretending is the most important thing. That doesn't give you a cop out to, as I said, just dump on people and not be effective, and not be good at what you do. But it creates an ethos of shared practices. It creates an ethos of shared leadership, and it creates an ethos of learning. Because if the leader is constantly in control, constantly never wrong, always knows what to do, then it leaves no space for other people to help. And we all need to know how to get help. So, and we all do need help, whether we like it or not. So yeah, it's how we view authenticity without it being about some kind of just being emotionally labile and dumping things on people, and oversharing, which is also not helpful.
No, definitely, and I think we all know some oversharers, don't we? Just
For
before
sure.
you, just before your third point, yeah, again, I feel like I keep going back to Simon Sinek, but interestingly, he does mention, usually when you become the leader or particularly the manager, but bearing in mind he tends not to deal with healthcare,
Mm.
he speaks about it's because you've become the expert at your previous level. So you should be able to be the expert and look down more strategically. But I think that's what we lack in sort of nursing and healthcare, because often we perhaps panic promote or we'll put people into positions of management and leadership who aren't experts in leadership or
Yep.
management. But that's another rabbit hole we probably shouldn't go
Yep.
down. So, so
But
what?
it's a good one to go.
Yeah, so definitely, yeah. But then that's about vulnerability and authenticity, isn't it? And that's where
Yep,
people go wrong.
for
And
sure.
so,
Yep.
what's your third point, Brendan?
So my third one, which is probably my favorite one, is that my top tip for leaders is that we need to create safe spaces for brave conversations, which is probably the practice that I use most and have used most, and that I strive to use most. If we do that, then it requires us to be non-hierarchical. So if I'm creating a space for where people can have a brave conversation and I'm in that room, then they can't be thinking, "Oh God, I can't say X, Y, and Z because the dean is in the room." If if they do, then it's not a safe space, and they're not going to be brave to say those things that they need to. So if we're so again, if we're creating that kind of ethos within our meetings or groups or gatherings, then we have to be authentic. I have to be able to, they have to see me as a real person, one of them, rather than somebody who's elevated onto some kind of hierarchical platform, and plinth that has to be honored in some way. And I've worked in this role, I've worked really hard and still working really hard at creating that kind of ethos because, this is a very hierarchical organization, a very bureaucratic organization with a long history of, elevated deans, and hierarchical management rather than distributive leadership, which is what I work with. And, you don't turn that around overnight. And kind of 2 years in, I can see it starting to change, but it's still got a long way to go. And that's my, reinforcing distributive leadership and non-hierarchical approaches to how we make decisions, being really honest with people. I am honest about everything that's going on in the school with everyone, and we do that primarily through our school council. But anybody can ask me anything, and I will tell them, other than when it's personal human resource issues that, of course, I'm not going to share. But that's probably the main boundary. The rest is a very open, transparent process, and that creates trust. And if you create trust, then you create spaces where people will talk to you because they're not going to be beaten over the head if they say something controversial, and you're not going to shout at them or alienate them. You're just going to kind of work with it, and that makes me transparent. That I have to be transparent if I'm going to do that. I can't have hidden agendas that only some people are part of, and not everyone. And so for me, that whole principle of creating safe spaces for brave conversations is one I've worked with for many, many years as a facilitator of change anyway. But as a leader, I think it's fundamental that people feel safe to be able to say those things that they may think is controversial or challenging or brave. And we have to actively work at creating those spaces.
Wow, that's amazing. Can I come and work with you?
You can.
Thank you. Definitely, yeah, yeah. And we see that we do lack that, don't we, for whatever reasons, which is a shame. But hopefully that there's small movements that are tackling that and hitting that on the head.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think there is a shift, and I definitely, have been part of a whole program of work here in our own faculty. So this structure here in Sydney is, I'm head of school and dean of nursing, but then part of a bigger faculty that's got every, healthcare subject in it, which is a huge, huge faculty. But and I'm one of the deans in that faculty. And we've been doing a lot of work as a group of deans. I'm not sure what the collective noun for a group of deans is, but we're, with the pro vice chancellor and all of us kind of doing leadership development around this kind of stuff about how do we, even though we are in a huge university with a huge bureaucracy and a huge hierarchy, how do we in the faculty as deans lead in a way that is distributive, that is inclusive, that builds trust, whilst recognizing and being honest about the fact we work in a very bureaucratic structure. And there are things we can do. We don't just have to lie down and just let that bureaucracy take over. There are lots of things we can do in and around it, which is what I'm doing in the school as well, that create a different kind of culture that makes people feel like they are part of something and that they have a say and that they can be part of the decision making process and they're not just, cogs in somebody else's wheel. But we have to work really hard at it as leaders. You can't just say it or can't do it, at a particular meeting and not at others. You have to be really consistent about doing it.
Definitely. Wow. Okay. So what sort of size of school is it you're part of, Brendan?
So in Australia terms, we would be considered to be one of the smaller ones
Oh wow.
in the school. I mean, the faculty is huge. It's got 15,000
Wow.
students in it. It's a massive research machine. The School of Nursing, we've got in total about 112 academics,
Wow.
about 4 or 5 professional staff. and about 3,000 students across our programs. But we would be small compared to some of the big schools in Australia. But we are the number one school in Australia and number 14 in the world. So hey, we like that position.
Definitely.
And that's also because we are working in one of the top universities, but also we have a very strong research culture. And that's a big part of who we are and what we do. And, when we're a smaller school, you can do that. If you're one of the huge schools with, 1,000 of a year one intake, then that's pretty difficult to do. So yeah, it's perfectly sized to allow us to do the things we want to do in terms of, and we see ourselves, our vision is to be global leaders of healthcare practitioners, and that's what we set up to be, and that's where we focus.
Wow, amazing. That sounds really cool. And you definitely see that in the UK, but probably overseas as well, where the smaller the school, the better the rankings are on the university league tables and stuff.
Yeah, yeah, it's really difficult when you're one of those huge schools with, in here, for example, with 1,000 in year one. Then it's so hard to do anything but kind of make sure that that's working as well as you possibly can. But trying to really generate top-notch research in that space is very challenging.
But it sounds like you're doing amazing in your school. So congratulations to all.
Thank you. It's a
Um,
long way to go, but we're doing pretty well.
Definitely, yeah. Is that it behind you? I'm guessing. Yeah, that's one of the buildings behind you on
Yes,
that.
that's
Yeah,
the
right
building.
down. Oh
Yes,
wow.
that's where I am. I'm up on that corner. Just see, can I find it? Where am I? I'm up at the top right hand corner over my shoulder.
Right. Okay. So good views.
Very good view, right over the city.
Oh wow, that's amazing. Okay, doke. So will we jump onto your two good examples of leadership, Brendan?
Yeah. Um, yeah, and again, I just thought, well, I'm in this podcast, so I thought I'll just stick them to me. I mean, because there's lots of good leaders I've worked with and still work with. And but I guess the one example I would use was my previous role actually at Queen Margaret University in Edinburgh. Um, I think the role I was able to engage in, the way I was able to be a leader there is what's really helped me shape how I'm a leader here in this school as well. I think so I would say the good leadership was my then boss, who was the head of school in that context. So it's at Queen Margaret's, it's division. So nursing is a division, nursing and paramedic science now. And then it was within the School of Health Sciences. So the dean of the school was an amazing leader, very clear in her direction, very um, yeah, very clear about what she was about, where the school was heading, worked very closely with us as heads of division, but in that sense, really kind of emulated that commitment to learning, to respecting people, to being authentic, being real, all of those things I've been talking about. And at the same time, was seen by many as a very strict kind of leader, or maybe a strict manager who, was very committed to making sure that we were doing things the best, that things were happening when they should be, calling people to account, all of that kind of stuff, which I really valued myself because I think sometimes you can be a good leader, but actually fail to call people to account and things slip. And I think it's getting that balance right that's really important. So because of that, and she really enabled me to be a very creative leader, to do lots of what might be seen as risky, innovative things. And we did as a division, we were really risky and innovative in how we worked and did some great stuff. And it was that combination of that sense of creating that safe space, so I could not just have brave conversations, but actually do brave things and step outside of the norm. And that's I think that's a really powerful thing. So that one immediately comes to mind. And so her name is Fiona Coots. She retired just as I left. And I would put her up there in terms of how to get that balance right. Actually, was I think really important. Um, the other, I think the other one, interestingly, also is a woman. Is my current executive dean, pro vice chancellor, here in the Faculty of Medicine and Health. Um, has done an incredible job in, yeah, she's been 6 years in um, generating this what's called a mega faculty because it's so huge. I mean, the faculty is bigger than most universities, um, and it's a huge operation. Um, and I really admire the kind of ability to bring this disparate collection of as there were individual faculties together with a whole host of research centers, networks, teams all over the place into a single highly functioning um, organization within this massive university bureaucracy as well. But I guess what I respect most, I think, is her authenticity. She's a very real, a very, very straightforward, very straight person. And I have a lot of respect for that. I mean, it's an interesting dynamic. I think she may be seen as very hard and not very open with some people, perhaps. But then I think, God, if you're leading a complex system like this one, then it's pretty difficult. But what I value, I think, is the authenticity more than anything, and the realness. And I'm able to have those brave conversations, and things will happen. And I think that's a really good exemplary of how a leader should be. Yes, you have to be hard at times. You have to be clear and direct when you're in these huge complex systems. But equally, being honest, being direct, being clear, being authentic, and able to create space where we can have those brave conversations is fantastic. So, yeah, they're the two that I would hold up.
Oh wow, amazing! And I guess it speaks volumes to the fact that leadership is fluid, isn't it? So these both examples you've given of these amazing women, do have to probably switch their hats around and be a bit dictatorial sometimes, but a bit
Yeah,
open the next time, and that's really important in leadership. Whereas I think we
yeah,
sometimes get stuck on having one hat on or one style on, and we fear veering out of that style
yeah.
or hat.
Well, I think that's why, Brian, I kind of, I mean, I'm very clear that, and I think you probably are as well, management and leadership are different things. But I think there are so many people who get stuck in what they think is leadership, but it's really management because they have this one style. They have to keep on using it. They think that that's what they have to stay doing. So it feeds into that culture of fear and compliance and control, because they're terrified of letting go. And if they let go, then it'll all fall apart. When actually, if they let go, it would cause them much less stress, much less hassle, and you would get more of a collective accountability. Um, and it's knowing how you walk those two things that, yeah, you can you have to be a manager and a leader at the same time when you're in these kind of roles, but absolutely knowing when you draw on one and the other, and that they're not going to serve the same purpose.
No, definitely not. No, that's amazing. Okay, doke. So we've got about 15 minutes left, and we're getting to the juicy part now, which is your one chosen leadership style, which is person-centered leadership. So, I'll have a quick, well, not a quick. I'll do a bit of a search and provide some links
Yeah,
for the readers. But do you want to delve into what is person-centered leadership?
yeah, God, I could be here all day. And and I'll try not to be. And I guess one of the things to say about it is that if I was having this conversation even 5, 6 years ago, then person-centered leadership probably would be consistent with what you said in your question to me about a leadership style that may not be in the literature per se, because back then person-centered leadership really wasn't in the literature. But actually, in the last 5 or 6 years, it really has got in the literature, and I think there's a much greater understanding of it. Most of that work have been connected with myself in some way, but yeah, and I think it's starting to. I'm never sure if it's a good thing that it might be seen as a model of leadership in itself, because I think we have too many of too many of them. Um, but I think that it has the potential to really uh, kind of put a different lens on some of those things that we kind of may just take for granted as a particular kind of functioning, or that we kind of get stuck into things like transformational leadership as a model. quiet leadership as a model. But actually, all of these things meld and blend with each other. And I think my focus on person-centered leadership is that it's just my way of being, and it takes on board so many of the principles that we might call transformational leadership, or we might call situational leadership, or we might call quiet leadership, or we might call authentic leadership. You know, we put too many of these labels on. So I don't want person-centered leadership to become another label, um, because it's not helpful. But I think it does sum up for me a set of practices that kind of are held or hold together some of those things I've just been saying to you. So person-centered leadership is, as I said, it's about being an authentic leader. It's about recognizing the personhood of people around you, not using people as pawns in a game. It's about recognizing, as Immanuel Kant would say, that people are ends in themselves, that they're not an end for another person's good, but are an end in themselves. And that it's a way of being rather than a way of doing. So it's about having these strong values. It's about understanding, my own being in the world and who I am as a person. So to be a person-centered leader, we have to do a lot of self-work. And I have done that and still do that. And that includes, I for a whole variety of reasons spent a best part of 2 years in psychotherapy, and that was transformational in itself in terms of helping me really take a hard look at myself and some of the things I need to pay attention to, and that's again was transformational in itself. But also I'm not saying everyone has to do psychotherapy. I think everyone should, but I don't think they have to. But also then, engaged in continuous development, continuous mentorship, continuous learning, and never taking for granted that what I'm doing is the right thing, or is it. It's never it. It's constantly learning and changing. So person-centered leadership is really about self and really trying to understand my own being in the world and how I am and the way that impacts on me and impacts on others. And it's more about the being than it is about doing. The doing, I think, is just about being a decent person, being able to make good decisions, knowing when to collaborate, knowing when you need help, knowing how to kind of get the best out of others, focusing on flourishing and creating cultures that help people to flourish. And then the practices are really the same practices we would use as nurses in practice, engaging in decision making, recognizing people's personhood and respecting that, working with different beliefs and values and trying to get a steady ground and how that looks in decision making, being present with people and honoring being present with people, and trying to see people as a whole, not just as pawns in a game, as I said, but actually that everyone is here for a common purpose and that we are trying to strive for that together. And so for me, that sums up how I try and lead, is to kind of do all of those things, but fundamentally from a position of reflexivity, of constantly paying attention to my own being and what am I putting out in the world, and the impact that has on other people.
Oh wow. It's interesting, isn't it? Because I get that we work in institutions, and institutions have to have rules and boundaries and things. And I see how, for example, if you look at person-centered care for the people we look after, and you look at hospital meal times, that annoys the life out of me. Why does Brian have to have his meal at 4 o'clock when the trolley
Oh,
comes? Why not 6 o'clock? But I
yep.
get that it's a big institute and it has to work, and the kitchen can't be open 24 hours. Well, I don't know who says it can't. That's
Uh,
a but
exactly.
but so, and I used to struggle with this as the student school president, that it was never about sort of the individual. It was always about the collective. It didn't matter if you as Brendan were having a crap time because
Yeah.
maybe 200 students were having an okay time. So we don't care about Brendan, for
Yep.
example. But going back to sort of hospital nursing, which I know nursing is not all of, but one person in the ward in agony doesn't mean it's okay, because 10
No,
people aren't.
exactly.
So I get that there's this balance of it being a working machine, but it's like you say, it's not a pawn, it's a person. So
Yeah.
we can't jump through hoops for every single person because that would be impossible. But how do you find a balance, Brendan? I don't know how we do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good challenge. And I think unfortunately, it's often, I will say that I think it's often used as an excuse by leaders and managers not to work in this way, but to just focus on hard rules, lists of rules, lists of uh, uh, things that people have to do, focusing on getting the tasks and the job done rather than the people who are trying to do those tasks. So for me, because person-centered leadership requires me to pay attention to the people first. And again, interestingly, as this leadership group of deans that I was telling you about earlier, we've been in a leadership development program ourselves, which we instigated, and we've had an amazing experience doing that over the last 18 months. But one of the things to come out of that was this particular assessment thing we did, which, I was extreme when it came to paying attention to relationships. And what's interesting about that is that, and we all of us, all 18 of us or whatever it was, did this exercise and a positioned us in this matrix. So you could see, what it is that what's people's preferred style. And my preferred style is absolutely that of relationships first. And then we get on with the rest. And we need that balance of people who are focused on relationships alongside others when you're in a large team with a complex organization. But as a leader who has a preferred style around relationships, I have to be also clear that there's work to be done. That I'm very clear about the school's KPIs. I'm very clear about the expectations of delivering on those KPIs with the leadership team here in the school. I call that team to account. We call each other to account for them on a regular basis. But I don't have to do that from a big stick kind of constantly, as I said, beating people over the head about it. If we have the right relationships in place, then they just take care of themselves. The process takes on its own way of being. And the problem is we have too many leaders who are actually managers who are just focused on ticking off those boxes and getting those tasks done and not paying attention to what is happening to people in that process. And for me, that's the detrimental part of many of our organizations where we do that. And so we just force people into these boxes to comply and then wonder why they're not happy, why they're not doing what they should do because they actually want to be doing something else. So it just sets up a whole set of other things that don't help. Whereas person-centered leadership isn't about, nice, let's all be nice to each other and just sit around and talk about our values all day. It's absolutely not. It's about it's very hard nosed because it is about constantly creating these conditions where people are going to be the best and achieve good outcomes, but it's focused on the people in terms of doing that, and that's what makes it quite distinct. It's not about the doing, it's about the being, and that's the fundamental difference between it and many other models of leadership.
Wow, I've learned a lot. Definitely. But yeah, it's true, isn't it? It's about that, as you say, person-centeredness and making people flourish, and then the rest will hopefully follow.
Ex- exactly, exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
Yeah.
As when we flourish, it's when we're at our happiest. And why would you not want that for everyone? Why would you not want that?
No,
So,
definitely not. No. Okay, doke. Well, I think that's a good place to probably come to our ending, which is another bit of gratitude, Brendan. So, when you go to your house, well, when you go home tonight, what will you be grateful for in your life?
oh,
Yeah.
God, I forgot about Well, hopefully, I'll be grateful for walking through the door, and my husband will have got the place in a way that means I can just sit down, chill for an hour or two. Um, I won't say that he'll have cooked the dinner because I do all of that, so that'll be. But I am very grateful for having a very nice partner, a very nice place to live, and living in a beautiful city, which is a great place to live. So yeah, but when I go home, I'd be very grateful for the place that I live and the fact that I have a great partner in it. So yeah, that'll be it.
Amazing. Well, that's great. So what we'll do is we'll stop recording now, Brendan. Thank you very much for taking the time, and I'm grateful that you did. And I hope the listeners enjoy.
Thanks a lot, Brian. It's been great talking to you.
No worries. Bye bye.
Bye.
So I really hope you enjoyed today's episode with the amazing Brendan McCormack. So we chatted about his amazing style of leadership, which is person-centered leadership. Now, when you listen to the podcast, you'll hopefully realize that this is simple stuff, it's basic human instinct to be able to carry out these characteristics, but we often don't. Why would we treat people the way we treat people is the big question, and why aren't we being person-centered leaders? I really hope you enjoyed the podcast, and I look forward to seeing you for the next one.